everyone. My name is Rick Henderson. I'm the lead pastor here at Autumn Ridge Church. And I want to welcome you back to the third installment of our series, Coming to Terms. We're looking at tough topics, trying to get unfiltered answers. Now, let me ask you this question. I know we love to be told the truth, but has there ever been a time that you just really want people to tell you the truth and it feels like you can't get the truth? It feels like people aren't giving you the unvarnished, the unedited, the unfiltered answers to the most important questions that you have. Now, I bet you don't like hypocrites. I don't like hypocrites. I'm not a fan of hypocrisy. Hasn't stopped me from being one, and I got to admit I am one a little bit. I love the truth, but I also love being told what makes me feel good. I love it when people act like my jokes are funny. I love it when people act like my ideas are good ideas. I'm a huge fan of my opinions. I love it when other people are fans of my opinions. I love it when people tell me what is affirming. I love it when people say things that make me feel good. And yet, I really do want the truth. I want the truth even if it's going to hurt. I want the truth even if it doesn't always feel good. And those desires of wanting to feel good and wanting to be told the truth, sometimes they're in tension. And if I could just be honest, I'm a walking contradiction, which is a nice way to say I'm a hypocrite. How about you? How are you doing with that tension of wanting to be affirmed and wanting to feel good and yet also wanting the truth, wanting somebody to tell you about reality as it actually is? I love it when people are brave enough and loving enough to tell me the real truth. And I bet you are too. Here's a verse in the Bible going back to the Old Testament. I love to hate this verse. It's this. It comes from Proverbs. Wounds from a friend can be trusted, but an enemy multiplies kisses. The people who love you the most are the people who want to hurt you the least, and yet they will spill it. They will say the hard truth with unflinching love. But it's the people who flinch in the face of honesty. Their love comes up short. Even if we're not okay, they're going to pretend like everything is okay. That's not what love does. I don't know about you, but I need people in my life who are willing, in love, to say the real truth to me, even if I'm not a fan of how it comes off at first. I need to hear the truth. I want people to say, this is reality because they love me and I know they have my best interest at heart. Today's message, it's not a multiply kisses kind of message. It's not going to be harsh. It's not going to be mean, but it is going to be one of those messages where we're giving unfiltered answers to a tough topic. And it's possible, I don't know where you're coming from, but it's possible that some of the things that you're going to hear today, it's going to feel like answers. It might feel like answers that are hard to hear. I want to go back to our series thesis. This is what we've been saying throughout this series. Faith works. And this word faith, it means allegiance. It means trust. And when you give your allegiance to Jesus, when you trust him and when you follow him, he is going to lead you into a life of greater freedom and greater joy. Whenever we align our life with the truth, we align ourselves with the possibility of greater freedom. We align ourselves with the possibility of greater joy. That's what truth does. It leads us into more freedom. It leads us into more joy. And if we believe in something, if we trust something, if we give our allegiance to something that isn't true, it's leading us away from more freedom. It's leading us away from more joy. And so today, let's buckle up together. Let's stand shoulder to shoulder. Let's lean in together and let's tackle a tough topic and let's be willing to hear the unfiltered answers, even if those answers don't always feel great at first. And to do that, because I know, even if I don't know you, I know something about you. You want as much freedom as you could possibly get. You want as much joy as you could possibly get. I want those things too. So let's lean into this and let's engage this tough topic by asking this question. Is Jesus your accessory, or is he your authority? And that question might be a bit blurry, so let me bring it into focus and help you think about this. When I'm talking about accessory, I'm talking about like a belt, like a piece of jewelry, you know? An accessory approach to Jesus is this. I agree with Jesus whenever he agrees with me. But Jesus' authority is a totally different approach. I agree with Jesus even when he disagrees with me. Now, when you set those two statements side by side, I agree with Jesus when he agrees with me, or I agree with Jesus even when he disagrees with me. It's hard to set those two statements side by side and to not have an emotional reaction to those things. And maybe emotional response isn't even a strong enough word. Many of us, when we look at those two statements side by side, when we put them together, we have a from our soul down to our toes kind of response to that. And it could be for the positive or it could be for the negative. And there are some of you, you're watching right now, and maybe you're leaning out, maybe you're ready to tune away because you have a strong negative response to that. And if your story was my story, then I would probably agree with you. You might be saying, there's no way that I could ever trust a religious authority. There's no way that I could ever trust a religious authority again. Because in your past, because your story is full of people who combined religion with authoritarianism to take advantage of people, to take money from people, to do all kinds of unacceptable things to people. And you look at that and you say, there's no way. I've got some good news for you. If you're listening to this and you're hearing me cheerlead and you're hearing me invite you to consider trusting Jesus as your authority, I've got good news. Even though that might feel like a million miles away from reasonable, I'm not asking you to trust a person, a guy like me. I'm not asking you to trust me as your authority. I'm not asking you to trust this church or to trust any church or organization as your authority. I mean, here's the reality. People and organizations, even churches, are fallible. You stick around long enough, I don't want to. You stick around long enough, I'm going to do something to disappoint you. You stick around long enough, we don't want to. But our church is going to do something to disappoint you. I'm not asking you to give your allegiance to. I'm not asking you to make an organization or person your authority. I'm asking you to trust Jesus as your authority. And while there might be some of you immediately hear that and you're resistant, and understandably so, I would feel the exact same way if your story was my story. There are just as many people, maybe even more people who are saying, absolutely, I'm celebrating that. Trusting Jesus as the authority of my life is the best decision that I ever made. I am clean. I'm whole. My life is turned around. My marriage is fixed. My finances are back on track. I mean, my relationship with my kids are better. My life is revolutionized for the better because I trusted Jesus as my authority. I want to take you back to something we introduced in week 1 of this series and introduce 4 major questions of life that everybody has to ask and answer regardless of where you're coming from: origin, meaning, morality, and destiny. And right now, I want to focus in on this one, morality. How should I live? Are there things that I ought to do even if I don't want to? Are there things that I ought not do even if I do want to? And this question right here, however you answer this, however you respond to this, it's going to expose, it's going to reveal who or what the authority of your life is. And that's not a term, authority, it's not exclusive to religious people, to Christian people, or to spiritual people. That's an everybody term. Everybody has an authority. You have one. You have something that you go to, that you trust most. It could be yourself. It could be a significant other. It could be a group. It could be an ideology. It could be a political affiliation. We all have one. And here's the deal. The authority that you trust most is either taking you further into more freedom and more joy, or it's taking you away from freedom and joy. And like a skilled surgeon, James, the brother of Jesus, the guy who had an front row seat and a backstage pass view into the life of Jesus, is giving us unfiltered access into what it's like to trust and follow Jesus. And like a skilled surgeon, he's going to cut down to the difference between an approach to Jesus that's an accessory approach or an approach to Jesus that's Jesus as my authority. Now, we're going to look at what does it mean to trust Jesus as your authority? What kind of impact does that have on you? And not only that, what does that lead you to? What kind of impact does that lead you to have on the world around you and in your community? And right now, it feels like never in my life has it been more important to make a positive impact on my community. And you probably feel the same way. Never in your life has it felt more important to make a positive impact in your culture, society, and in your community. And maybe never in our lives has it felt like it's been so easy to get it wrong. There's a lot at stake here. And so regardless of what your viewpoint is on Jesus, even if you're unsettled yet on what the authority is of your life, because there's so much available to us and so much at stake, we should lean in and at least see what he has to say. And so let's start James chapter 1, verse 19. My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen. That sounds good. Slow to speak. Pretty good advice. And slow to become angry, because human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. Therefore, get rid of all moral filth. You got to remember, he's talking to Jesus followers. He's talking to Christians. The expectation is that we've got stuff on our side of the street we got to deal with. We got some sin issues, some moral brokenness issue that we have to deal with. Therefore, get rid of all moral filth and the evil that is so prevalent, and humbly accept the word planted in you, which can save you. Now, if we just start off with the first couple of sentences that James is talking about there, regardless of what your religious persuasion is, it just seems like good advice. Hey, be the kind of person that's slow to speak, quick to listen, slow to get angry. Like the world would just be a better place if more people were like that. How great would it be as the emotions go up, as the anger goes up, as the blood begins to boil, if at the same time it was just normal for people to ramp up self-evaluation, kind of slow down and look inward. Here's why that's so important. It's hard to think clearly when you feel strongly. It's just hard to think clearly when you feel strongly. Now, I'm not telling you this, and I would never say don't feel strongly. Not at all. Who am I to say that to you? I don't have the right to say that. But what I am saying is this. We're setting ourselves up for hurt. And we're setting ourselves up to hurt other people if we ignore the reality of how hard it is to think clearly when we feel strongly. We can't listen well unless we're thinking clearly. We can't solve problems well unless we're thinking clearly. We can't make progress with anything of value in our lives if we're not thinking clearly. If I could, I want to take my pastor hat off for a second and just talk as a dad, because I'm a dad, and I know that there are many of you parents out there watching. And what I'm going to share is what I wish that I can get my kids to understand. I'm working hard to get my kids to understand. You probably want your kids to understand this. And maybe you don't even have kids, but you're wishing when you hear what I say next, you're going to wish, man, I wish somebody would have told me that when I was younger. It would have helped me. And here it is. Be aware. Be aware and be cautious of the people who are trying to whip you up and keep you whipped up. Be aware and be cautious of the people who are trying to get you to feel strongly and who are trying to keep you in an emotional frenzy, because on all sides of the political spectrum, on all sides of the social activist spectrum, there are people who are trying to get you to feel strongly so they can do the thinking for you. Just be aware of that. All right, so I'm going to take the dad hat off, put the pastor hat back on. Talking as a pastor now. All the stuff that James has to say and the things that we've talked about so far about, thinking clearly and feeling strongly, that's good advice. And if we stopped there, we just have some wisdom. And yet, we would miss the heart of what James is really talking about, because we wouldn't be looking at it in context. The real context of what James is talking about here, about the reason that we should be slow to speak and quick to listen and slow to get angry, is because there is a reality that true followers of Jesus will truly be offended, truly be insulted by, and occasionally truly angry over things that Jesus taught. James is saying, listen, there are going to be times when you read the New Testament or you hear the teachings of Jesus that you're going to have an instant negative reaction. When that happens, be quick to listen. Be slow to speak. Slow to get angry. And it's just a reality that's a normal part of even the Christian experience. And this word anger that James uses, it's not an outburst, kind of excited reaction word for anger. Really what this means is a slow burn. A slow burn. So let me ask you, what are some things that you read in God's word that you just wish weren't there? What are some things that Jesus said that you wish he had never said? What are some things that were written down by the apostles that you wish they never wrote down? What are some things that give you a slow, smoldering burn? Who's got a slow burn over what the New Testament has to say about money? Who's got a slow burn over what the New Testament has to say about sex? Who's got a slow burn over what the New Testament has to say about loving your enemies? So let me ask you real quickly. How you doing? Regardless of where you land on the political spectrum, regardless of what side of the fence you're on when it comes to social issues, when you look across at the people who disagree with you, who you could never agree with, how are you doing at loving those people and truly wanting what's in the best interest of those people too? Who's got a slow burn related to what the New Testament has to say about elevating love over our rights? Who's got a slow burn over what the New Testament has to say about gossip? Who's got a slow burn over what the New Testament has to say about elevating the needs of others over our own? Now, here's the deal. This is going to be something that we wrestle with from time to time. And some of you might be asking this question. You might be saying, if I got a slow burn, does that make me a bad Christian? If I got a slow burn over something that I hear from Jesus or that I read in the New Testament, does that make me a fake Christian? Anger at Jesus' commands doesn't make you a fake Christian. It makes you a frustrated one. Has there ever been a time that something is broken and you're trying to fix it and get it right and someone's just hovering over your shoulder? Don't you hate that? I hate it when I'm trying to get something right on my computer and I can't figure out this program that I'm using and someone's just right over my shoulder and they reach over and they grab my laptop. I just, get away from me. Stop it. Knock it off. I hate that. It's so frustrating. That's the kind of perspective I'm asking you to see this through. If you're a follower of Jesus, that means you've said to Jesus, I give you my allegiance. I trust in you. You're the leader. I'm the follower. And whenever we got a slow burn, and that's going to happen, whenever we got a slow burn over something that he said or something we read in his word, it's kind of like we're grasping back for control. We're straining for leadership, being the authority, instead of trusting him as the authority. It's totally understandable to me. Totally understandable why some people would say, hey, Rick, of course, as a Christian, there are going to be times that I totally disagree with what I read in the New Testament. After all, I'm a modern, educated person. I can understand that. Could we still be friends, though? Could we still be friends if I suggested that maybe it has nothing to do with your place in history and it has nothing to do with your education? Could we still be friends if I suggested that maybe it's something different than that? This tension, this slow burn reality goes a long way back in history. I'm going to reach all the way back in 1,500 years ago. Augustine was a Christian theologian. He was a philosopher. He was a church leader in North Africa. 1,500 years ago, this is what he wrote. If you believe what you like in the gospel and reject what you don't like, it's not the gospel you believe, but yourself. It's not a point of history issue. It's not an education issue. It's a submission issue. It's an authority issue. And what James is inviting us to come to terms with, and what Augustine would be inviting us to come to terms with, what I am inviting us to come to terms with, is what it means to discover the freedom and joy of trusting Jesus as our authority. So for the next couple of minutes, I want to quickly walk through, line by line, verse by verse, some of the things that James has to say about this. Verse 22, do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourselves. Do what it says. If you're a note taker, take note of this. Allegiance without action is merely acknowledgement. Allegiance without action is merely acknowledgement. That's pretty obvious, right? It needs no further explanation. I don't need to expound on that. What we're talking about right here, what James is talking about right here, has nothing to do with comprehension. It is 100% about, solely about, submission not comprehension, but submission. Let's look again. Anyone who listens to the word but does not do what it says is like someone who looks at his face in a mirror and after looking at himself goes away and immediately forgets what he looks like. Now, this might seem strange, but what James is doing, what he's saying is when you don't follow the leadership of Jesus, it's like you have forgotten who you are. Here's a reality of life that I want us to take note of. It's this right here. Your identity drives your activity. What you believe about yourself, what you really think about you, how you see you defines and determines what you're going to do and what I'm going to do. And so if you doubt, if I were to doubt, if we doubt that we are fully loved, fully accepted, fully forgiven, fully delighted in by Jesus, if we doubt those things, then our behavior is going to begin to demonstrate, it's going to begin to reveal that we are looking for acceptance and value and significance in other things. Your identity drives your activity. My identity drives my activity. Continuing on. But whoever looks intently into the perfect law that gives freedom and continues in it, not forgetting what they have heard, but doing it, they will be blessed in what they do. And remember, each week we've said, as James uses this word blessed, it has no financial ramifications whatsoever. He's not talking about finances. This word blessed means this: free of anxiety, full of delight. They will be blessed in what they do. Freedom is not eliminating restrictions, but embracing the right ones. James talks about freedom in this. Listen, you're going to have freedom. Freedom is not eliminating restrictions, but embracing the right ones. Let me ask you this question. Who is more free? That's probably not grammatically correct. Who is freer? The person who can say and does say no to themselves, or the person who never says no to themselves? Who's freer? Who's healthier? The child with boundaries or the child who's raised without boundaries? Which relationship is better? Which relationship is fuller? Which relationship thrives more? The relationship in which the two people involved, they say no to themselves and they happily embrace boundaries and restrictions, or the relationship in which people, they never say no to themselves. They never have any boundaries or restrictions. Which society is freer? Which society experiences greater freedom? The one that has the presence of right authority, or the one that's in anarchy? Freedom isn't eliminating restrictions. It's the presence of the right ones. Those who consider themselves religious and yet do not keep a tight rein on their tongues deceive themselves, and their religion is worthless. Hold on for a second. This word religious right here, this word carries a lot of baggage. I don't want us to get hung up on that baggage. And if you've listened to me talk, or if you continue to listen to me talk in the future, you'll hear me contrast a religious approach, which is not good, with a gospel approach, which is what we're advocating. When James uses the word religious or religion, what he simply means is this: the outward expression of what you believe. Let me read this again. Those who consider themselves religious, and yet they do not keep a tight rein on their tongues, they deceive themselves, and their religion is worthless. The outward expression of what they believe is worthless. He continues. Religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this: to look after orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world. Would you think about this with me? Don't underestimate our love affair with self-expression and our aversion to serving, sacrifice, and submission. So let me ask you a couple of questions. Who are the vulnerable people who you are happily befriending? Who are the vulnerable people who you care about? Who are the vulnerable people who you happily care for? Who are the vulnerable people who you are happily enmeshing your life with because you want to serve them and you want to love them well because you genuinely, authentically care about them. I'm not talking about the drive-by acts of kindness that sometimes we do, not always, but sometimes we do it because it just makes us feel better. What James is talking about is far messier than that and is far better than that. And so I want to ask a punchy question. If this hasn't felt like hard truth yet, maybe it'll feel like hard truth here. So respectfully and gently, but it's a punchy question. Is the outward expression of what you believe, is it worthless or is it acceptable? And really the main difference has to do with who holds on to the reins, who grabs hold of the steering wheel, who gets to be the leader, who is the authority. Tim Keller is a pastor who I've admired for quite some time, and he said this far better than I could, so I want to share with you what's encouraged me and helped me. He said this: the mark of a God-changed heart. The mark of a God-changed heart is that you love for God to tell you how you should live. I don't know about you. I've never been a big fan of being told what to do. Are you a big fan of being told what to do? I've never been a big fan of that. And yet I have needed it. And I have just lost count of the number of times in my life that I've learned this lesson the hard way or had to experience this lesson again the hard way, is that I need real leadership, that I'm not up to the challenge of leading me, that I need authority. I remember one time back in college, I wanted to join a gym. I wanted to get healthy. And so I went and I joined a gym, and I immediately regretted it because I signed myself to a contract that I couldn't afford. It overextended me financially. Here I am, I'm trying to be healthy, and I just did something incredibly unhealthy financially, and I'm stuck, and I'm unhelpable because I don't want to listen to anybody. And I know that word unhelpable is not a real word, but it should exist because that perfectly described my situation. Unhelpable because I needed leadership, but I wasn't ready to listen to anyone. I was just going to write out my financial difficulty on my own, not listening to anybody. And my mom knew what was going on, and she knew that I wasn't willing to listen to anybody give me any instruction. So in a moment of wisdom, she just casually asked me the next day, "Hey, Rick, did you know that there is a law in our state that says you can back out of any financial contract within 3 days with no penalty whatsoever?" I was like, oh my goodness. I immediately dropped everything that I was doing and I went back to the gym and I got out of that financially difficult situation for me. Thank you, Mom. I appreciate that. Here's the deal. Let me ask you this question. Are there times that you can look back on your life, and even though that you wanted the best for you, even though you intended well for you, you weren't up to the challenge to lead you, and yet you weren't willing to let anybody else lead you either? Now, some of you guys might be saying, Rick, listen, that's just a dumb story from college. Everybody's got stories of being dumb back when they were in college, or stories of being dumb back in their early 20s. True, we probably all do. I bet you do. But the problem is really worse than that. Isn't it true? Isn't it true that in your 20s you can look back and see the foolishness of your teens that you couldn't see when you were a teenager? And when you're in your 30s, you can look back and see the foolishness of your 20s that you couldn't see when you were in your 20s? And when you're in your 40s, you can look back and see foolishness in yourself from your 30s that you just couldn't see then. And when you're in your 50s, you can see it back in your 40s, and on it goes. Do you know what that means? We're always foolish. We just can't see it now. We're always foolish. We just can't see it yet. And even when we are at our best, we're not qualified. We're not up for the task of, on our own, answering this major question of life, of morality. How should I live? And if you're not convinced yet, that's okay. But let me ask you this. What's the alternative? Really, what's the alternative of trusting Jesus as your authority? Let me tell you what our culture says. This is what our culture says. This is what our culture celebrates. Autonomous authority. You do you. You are on your own. You get to be the authority of your life. Don't let anybody tell you what to do. Go with your own truth. Go with what makes you happiest. Do what you want. Just don't hurt anybody. Here's the problem. It's a myth. Our culture is lying to us because they never, ever let anybody live that way. They say autonomous authority, but this is what we actually get. This is reality. Anonymous authority. And what I mean by that is you never know who and you never know when, but if you step out of line, you're going to be shamed, ridiculed, and bullied relentlessly. Now, I'm not picking sides on this. I don't want to get into that. I just want to be the guy who defines reality as it actually is, describes it as the way things actually happen. How many 20-somethings have risen to prominence and they're now publicly shamed for something stupid they said when they were a teenager? How many people have not harmed anybody, but they've lost good standing or they lost their job because of who they affiliated with socially, who they affiliated with politically, or who they made donations to? Again, I'm not picking sides. I'm just saying this is the way things are. How many of you watching right now, there have been times that you have been hesitant, and not just hesitant, you haven't engaged at all. You've been hesitant or you haven't engaged at all to talk honestly and openly about a hot button issue because you didn't know where it was going to come from. You didn't know where the shame was going to come from. And you didn't know who it was that was going to start scrutinize you. You just knew that somebody was going to do it, and it was a little too scary to step out there. What I'm talking about isn't new. Going back centuries, probably all of human history, older generations have looked down on newer generations. Younger generations have judged older generations against an evolving modern moral standard. We're just in a mess. Follow your own authority. Be the leader of your own life. It is a hollow mantra that has never been honored. It doesn't work. This is what we need. We need authentic authority. Authentic authority. And the reason that James switched his allegiance to Jesus, the reason that I gave my life to Jesus, is the exact same reason that we're asking you to trust Jesus, to give Jesus your allegiance and to let him be the authority of your life. And it's this right here. The gospel is the only story in which the hero died for the villain. The gospel is the only story in which the hero died for the villain. That God, when you see this clearly, it will change your life. That God chose to suffer for us so that we could be with him. That he chose to die for us so that we could have life. What greater thing could you ever do to demonstrate that you are the authority worth trusting? And when Christ rose from the dead, what greater thing could ever be done to validate you are the authority? He is the authority worth trusting. And when you trust in him, and when you experience him, and you experience the new life and the freedom and the joy that comes from knowing him and following him and applying what you read in his word, all other approaches to religion, all other approaches to Jesus, they just wilt. They wilt by comparison. I don't have time to dive into these as much as some of you may want me to, but real quickly, let me share with us two accessory approaches to Jesus, two accessory religions that we should just reject. Number one is political religion. Political religion aligns with power. True religion aligns with the vulnerable. That's exactly what James is talking about in verse 27. Here's the second one. Prosperity religion. Prosperity religion aligns with greed. True religion aligns with need. Here's what Jesus followers understand. People who have chosen to follow Jesus understand that even when we are at our best, when life goes perfectly, if we were to achieve all that we set out to intend, if we were to earn more money than we could ever spend, if we were to scale the heights of education, we still wouldn't be free from the reality of death, and we would still be vulnerable to the moral failings of the world around us and the broken morality inside of us. That we are in need of Jesus to truly be our lead. And we are happiest when we trust him most. We are happiest when we follow his lead. And we're happiest when we love others the way that he has loved us. So I want to leave you with this thought. Jesus can be your accessory, or he can be your authority, but he can't be both. Will you pray with me? Heavenly Father, we thank you for the clarity of your word. And I just want to thank you that you love us so strongly and so patiently, that you have left instructions for us for what to do when we don't like reading or hearing what you have said. And that doesn't scare you. And because it doesn't scare you, help us to not be afraid of those experiences too, but to come to love the freedom and the joy that's found and following you as the leader of our lives. And it's in the name of Jesus we pray.